see she's got a very clean entry, almost no splash on it. And while that doesn't always mean everything, it typically can show us, like in this case, how she had very good control on the dive. The one thing I would take off more is that she just didn't seem as tight as she could be. I would go 5.5, maybe even a 6 on that dive. You would just like to see her be a little tighter through her muscles in the air. Shows something interesting and something to look out for here. He took a little crow hop, which if you notice is where he took a little extra jump off the board before he actually went. It was very small, so I wouldn't take off substantially for it, but that's where I would go about a 4.5 on that dive rather than a 5 or a 5.5. It was nice otherwise. It's a little too far back and a little short of vertical, but that crow hop, especially for our purposes, can be a very dangerous thing. And that's why you really want to look out for it and why it's important to take off a little bit for it, if for nothing other than to sometimes get the message through the kids. You're doing something that could potentially be troublesome and we'd like to avoid it at all costs. I would go about a 3 on that dive. Even though she had nice tight pike, she's got nice legs there where they're tight, and she's got her toes pointing, that kind of thing. However, she's got her head down too much, which causes her to land on her back a little bit. And again, we see a little bit of twist on that. And that one was a little more substantial than what we saw earlier on the back dive pike, I believe it was. And gives us a good contrast to that. This dive was pretty much straight, a tiny bit of twist, but for all intents and purposes straight. She was nice and tight in the air. However, she went a little too far back. I would go a 5, maybe a 5.5 on that dive. However, if it's a little closer to the board, we can certainly go 6, 6.5, 7 on that dive. It's a very nice inward flip. I would go 6 on that. That's a difficult dive. Any of the feet first dives are difficult to score much above a 6 on just because they don't typically have as pretty, for lack of a better word, of a line going in the water. However, he has very good control. It's a nice, fast, tight somersault. He's straight up and down when he goes in the water. The only thing you would really look for is if he was a little higher, then maybe you could go 6.5, 7 on that dive. But a solid inward somersault there. Shows us, again, a nice controlled takeoff, much like we just saw on Anton. She had good speed. However, she didn't know what to do with that good speed, and that's where I would go about a 3.5 just because it went over under her stomach way too much. It was a nice dive otherwise, the kind of dive that could go a 5.5 or a 6 if she were vertical on it, but that just kind of shows the importance of being able to finish off a dive as well. Shows us an inward 1.5. This is a dive again that you'll see a few of the kids do, especially as you get into the older age groups. I'll go about a 2.5, maybe a 3 on that. He had a good spin. He was clearly spinning pretty well and had that, but no come out to speak of. And in fact, if you were to see less come out, where they don't begin to come out, that's another thing that the referee will make the decision, and that would be a max 2 if there was no come out. In this circumstance, he had some, but a very minor come out, and that's where I would go the 2.5, maybe the 3. David shows us a very nice in a 1.5, probably a 6 dive, just a little short of vertical. He's way up high though, he's spinning well, he's got good control on the dive. Just didn't quite get it straight up and down enough to get the 7, 7.5. Taylor, what we we were trying to demonstrate there was a front dive half twist, and that's something she hasn't worked on, to her credit. But that's something where the referee will take over. She did not make the half twist as you have to. But again, that's something where you as a judge, you don't have to worry about it. They will take care of that. As long as the judge says go ahead and score it, you can score whatever you want. Now in this circumstance, the proper score would be to go ahead and score to 0. Even if the referee said to go ahead and score it, she didn't get her body to 90 degrees, which would be required her either facing us. And therefore, as a judge, you're perfectly within your right to score a 0 on that. Now, Alice's dive here, front dive half twist, again, this is something we're not real adept at. However, on that, she goes way too far over on the stomach, clearly made the twist, but not a whole lot better than failed dive there. I would go about a 2 on that. Shows us a very nice full twisting front somersault, very good control. However, he's got that right arm up. That's a situation again where the referee is going to take over and say it's max 2. I would score at that 2 because it was certainly a very nice dive otherwise. And if you disregard that, if we were to imagine that his hands were down, that would be a 5.5 to 6, maybe even a 6.5 dive. He was tight throughout the air. He had very good control of the twist. He was straight on. However, of course, that arm's going to take over and knock the score down. Luke shows us the same idea right there. That's where I would give the 5. He wasn't as tight going in the water, so I would knock it down just a little bit, but he's way up high. He's got good control of his body. The only thing substantially we're taking off for is it's a little bit out away from the board. It's a little too loose going in the water, but that's the same dive in the large part that we saw Chris do, just with his hands down by his side like he's supposed to do. Now David's going to demonstrate something that's a little tougher to judge. This is multiple twisting dives. This is a front somersault 2 twist. It's very difficult to determine if they've actually done the number of twists, if they finish it up square. In this case, we see David ends up straight on the twist, facing the opposite end of the pool, exactly like he's supposed to be. So I would go 5 on that dive, simply too far away from the board and a little bit over on his stomach. But in terms of the twist, you wouldn't take off anything for that. Very nice in that regard. Twisting for 1.5. I would go 7 on that. Just a little too far over on his back on the finish of it, but he's tight throughout the air. He's got very good control of the dive.